If you live in Bryer County long enough, eventually someone will warn you about the old boundary road. That's how nearly every story about Black Hollow begins. The road cuts through 14 miles of dense forest just outside a fading mining town in eastern Kentucky, and during the day it looks completely ordinary. Hunters use it, utility crews drive through it, and teenagers sometimes park there at night. But locals almost never stay after sunset. Not because of ghosts or monsters, at least not officially, but because over the last 30 years too many people have reported the exact same thing: strange lights between the trees, voices where nobody should be, and the overwhelming feeling that something is following them just beyond the dark. At first, most people blamed the stories on isolation and imagination. Black Hollow sits deep inside a section of forest where the hills block radio signals and heavy fog rolls in fast after dark, especially during late fall. State records show at least 7 missing persons cases connected to the area since 1991, although officials insist the terrain itself explains everything. Narrow roads, steep drop-offs, and miles of unmarked woodland can easily disorient hikers unfamiliar with the region. But several reports describe details that are harder to dismiss. Drivers claim their headlights reflected off figures standing between the trees, only for those shapes to disappear the second they stopped their vehicles and looked again. The story that changed the town happened in October of 2008 when a 19-year-old named Caleb Mercer drove into the forest just after dusk with 2 friends. According to the official report, the group planned to photograph an abandoned fire tower nearly 6 miles past the old mining road. Around 10:40 that night, one of the friends called emergency services claiming Caleb had wandered off into the trees after hearing someone shouting his name from deeper in the woods. Search teams arrived within an hour and found the group's truck parked near the trailhead, but what disturbed investigators was not the disappearance itself. It was the fact that several volunteers later reported hearing movement around them even when nobody else was nearby. Authorities eventually concluded that Caleb most likely became disoriented in the dark and wandered deeper into the forest while temperatures dropped below 40 degrees overnight. On paper, the explanation made sense. The terrain around the old mining routes is uneven, packed with sinkholes, loose rock, and thick pine growth that can block visibility within a few feet after sunset. But some details continued bothering the people involved in the search. Multiple volunteers later stated that they heard what sounded like footsteps pacing them from the tree line, yet every time they stopped to listen, the forest became completely silent. Even stranger, 2 search dogs reportedly refused to continue past the same section of trail near the creek bed. That section of trail had a reputation long before Caleb disappeared. Older residents in Bryer County called it the Hollow Line, an unofficial boundary where people claimed the forest changed after dark. Former miners once described hearing distant conversations deep in the hills despite being miles from the nearest camp, and hunters occasionally reported seeing lights moving silently between the trees where no roads existed. Most locals laughed these stories off during the daytime, but very few were willing to test them at night. One retired park ranger later admitted that during his 12 years working near the area, he never once entered the old mining roads alone after sunset because, in his words, the silence out there never felt natural. 3 days after the search began, investigators discovered something that only deepened the mystery. Caleb's backpack was found beside the creek nearly 2 miles from where his friends last saw him, but according to the official timeline, he could not have reached that location on foot before the first search team sealed off the area. Even stranger, the bag was completely dry despite heavy rain falling across the forest that entire night. Inside, officers recovered a flashlight, a camera, and Caleb's phone. The phone itself no longer worked, but technicians later confirmed that one final video file had been recorded at exactly 9:17 p.m. The footage lasted only 11 seconds before abruptly cutting to static. The recording was never officially released, but parts of it were described by 2 volunteers who claimed they heard the audio during the investigation. The video allegedly showed Caleb walking through dense trees while breathing heavily and repeatedly asking if someone was ahead of him on the trail. For most of the footage, nothing unusual appeared on screen. Then, during the final few seconds, the camera tilted toward the tree line where a single distant light could supposedly be seen moving between the woods. Investigators dismissed it as another flashlight somewhere in the search area, except no teams had entered that section of forest yet. According to radio logs, the nearest rescue crew was still over a mile away. Caleb Mercer was never found. Officially, the case remains an unresolved missing persons investigation, one of several connected to the forests surrounding Bryan County over the last few decades. Today, the old mining roads are still accessible, and during daylight the area appears completely ordinary aside from abandoned equipment slowly rusting beneath the trees. But after sunset, traffic through the hollow line almost completely disappears. Even now, residents who grew up near the forest avoid stopping there at night, especially near the creek where Caleb's backpack was discovered. Because according to locals, if you stay quiet long enough in those woods, eventually you start hearing someone moving nearby even when nobody else should be there at all. Maybe there is a rational explanation for everything that happened in Black Hollow. Maybe Caleb Mercer became lost in dangerous terrain, and maybe decades of local stories transformed ordinary wilderness into something far more unsettling. But some details still refuse to fit cleanly into the official timeline. The unexplained light in the final recording, the dry backpack found after hours of rain, the repeated reports of movement around search teams, and the fact that experienced locals still avoid those roads after dark all leave behind the same uncomfortable question. Because in places like Bryan County, the fear is not always that something is waiting in the woods. Sometimes it is the feeling that the woods themselves are watching you.